Hi, and welcome to the Planet Driven Brands podcast. In this show, we will be discussing with our guests how brands they represent can help in the drive to build a better, more sustainable and safer planet. We will highlight brands as drivers for change and the role they play as influencers. How will brands positively impact the planet and its environment? This is what we're going to find out. Do brands actually have any responsibility to change? The Planet Driven Brands podcast, episode 35. Today's guest is Dr. Daniel Stewart, the co-founder and CEO of ViridiCO2. Today we're going to be talking about increasing sustainability through CO2. Hi Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if you could give us a quick introduction.
Hi Nick, yes, thank you. My name is Dr. Daniel Stewart, although I don't insist on the doctor, so just that. I am a research fellow at the University of Southampton, where I've completed sort of my undergraduate and my PhD studies, but I'm also the co-founder and CEO of imminent spin-out ViridiCO2.
What is the responsibility of brands, businesses, and ourselves to the planet?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question that I'll be very honest that I hadn't really considered sort of the whole brand aspect. And knowing I was coming onto this podcast, I sort of had a real think about it and what the motivations are behind it for companies. But ultimately, and what lies at the heart of my personal sort of aims in life and the aims around ViridiCO2 is that a brand and a company, they have to be responsible for the future of not only themselves, but everything around them. And we've been talking for years, and I'm sure we'll touch on it a little bit later, that we have to be responsible for tomorrow. A brand that takes the sustainability, the future vision, the responsibility in their everyday decisions is what I would define as being sort of planet driven, and it's vital.
You come from an age where we are reaching a point where it might be too late if we don't do something. Does that make you angry about the people from my generation?
I wouldn't say angry, no. This is where it's important to try and differentiate people's personal decisions versus big company decisions. People's personal decisions are driven by their personal circumstances, whether that is economics, sort of availability, anything like that. Whereas with companies, it's more to do with just their profit margins. And that's where I get annoyed. So I wouldn't say I'm angry, no, not at all. I'm very pleased that I've had the education that I've had all the way through school, sort of making me aware of it, that these things are happening and that change needs to be brought about. And actually the lack of people going about and changing them is one of my drivers for starting a company.
You know, a lot of the debates on these podcasts have been about how much the consumer should be pushing brands and businesses and how much businesses and brands should be helping consumers. But ultimately, aren't we all in this together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most interesting debates that I frequently read about is the plastics debate. So plastics are sort of universally now understood to be really bad. And I'm drawing on my chemistry background here, plastics are fantastic at what they do. Yeah. They provide all of the properties that we could ever need. They make our food last longer, etc. The problem is that we are not responsible enough in their sort of disposal procedures. If we had everybody on the planet disposed of them and recycled them the way they should be, we wouldn't be in this situation we're in. Unfortunately, there is not enough respect for that. There's not enough drive for consumers to do it. So therefore, there has to be a transition of responsibility to companies, and unfortunately, the companies have to take that into consideration. The way you get around that, as you mentioned, is sort of consumers putting pressures on companies. I think that's true if their companies are fundamentally not going far enough and they have to be the leaders in that situation. I do think strongly that the power of the people, if they say they want something and enough people are willing to get behind it and demand it, that has a big influence. And it also has an influence on sort of the legislative side about it. Now, I do understand I'm not opening up political debate here. I did read that in the rules. But I think everyone has responsibility, consumers, companies, government, and we have to work together to to make sure that it isn't the end.
I'm really, really keen to talk about ViridiCO2. I'm just going to read from your website and then let you comment. ViridiCO2 catalytic solutions. We turn CO2 into tailored chemical intermediates, increasing sustainability and closing the carbon loop. That's one hell of a claim. So I need you to start from the very beginning and then tell us how it's going to achieve that. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best way to start this is to kind of understand a little about what I've done sort of in the build up to ViridiCO2. Yeah. So in 2016, I started my PhD at the University of Southampton under the supervision of Professor Robert Raja. Robert is my co-founder, co-inventor, and probably more than that, he's a mentor and a friend. But Robert's expertise, he's a globally recognized professor in the design and implementation of catalysts for industrial processes. Now, for those in your audience who aren't necessarily on top of the chemical lingo, which is absolutely fine, a catalyst is something that is added to nearly every single chemical reaction in the world, generally, to make it go faster under lower temperatures and pressures, and arguably is the most important technology that human beings have ever created. I started my PhD focusing on a catalyst which was capable of transforming carbon dioxide. I sat down with Robert at the very beginning and said, I'm not doing a PhD for 4 years just for the fun of it. Let's do something really meaningful. And we decided we'd try CO2. Start easy, right? And we focused on the production of something called a polyol. So it's a polymer, it is a plastic. Yeah. And it is derived normally from 100% fossil fuels. So we were coming at this problem to use CO2 to directly produce these polymers and to reduce the amount of fossil fuels used in that process. And actually, the science we were working on wasn't new. The actual reaction to make these polyols has existed since the 60s. But the catalysts to make it happen, you need a catalyst to make this reaction happen, are far and few between. 6 months in, we found something that worked. And ultimately, this is a heterogeneous catalyst. So it is a catalyst which is in a different phase to those starting materials. So we talk about fossil fuels and CO2. That's a gas and a liquid. Yes. The catalyst we're using is a solid. So it's in a different phase. And that's really industrially important because it's really easy to remove. So the analogy I like to use is trying to remove sand and water. Really easy. Your sand sinks to the bottom, you pour off your water, you've removed your catalyst from the water. And it just went from there. We worked on it for the next 3 years, for the whole of my PhD. Through this process, we were suddenly awakened to the opportunity we have here to really bring about some change in the world. And really, it's just been a whirlwind journey from there. But ultimately, to bring it all back into what ViridiCO2 truly does is we supply a chemical process to the big chemical manufacturers or big CO2 emitters that provides them with a solution to utilize waste carbon dioxide from their other processes in the production of materials that are of value to them.
Wow. So does that mean we are taking CO2 out of the process?
What this is a redirection of CO2 that would otherwise end up in the atmosphere. So just every chemical plant has a power station. The majority of them are sort of coal-fired. So they're going to be churning out CO2 emissions from the burning process in order to heat, etc. So imagine, rather than just pumping all of that CO2 out into the atmosphere where it's going to be a problem, we just redirect that CO2 into, say, a chemical reactor where it's pumped in, and then we have our catalytic technology in there, and we can turn those emissions into a product which can be sold and be used in anything. And I mean, the extent of use of these kind of chemicals is huge and far-reaching. So just the base sort of polyol itself is a feedstock material for polyurethanes. Polyurethanes is going to be a $75 billion industry by 2025. And up to sort of 50% of the weight will be coming from, if not more, from the polyol starter. So that's what we're making. But alternatively, we can also make the electrolytes for batteries. Battery technology is huge. So that means the amount of electrolyte is going to increase. And if we can derive it from carbon dioxide, that means we're cleaning up sort of the industry from a CO2 perspective, and also reducing the fossil fuels that normally go into these.
If I sort of said, all right, I found a fabric that I think I can make t-shirts out of, but and I would like to make them CO2 t-shirts. Is that something? Is this what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So these are the things we're looking into at the moment. So you have a lot of say synthetic fibers. So we're talking about your polyesters, your nylons. They all generally are derived from fossil fuels. Yes. Now, what we can do is tune our catalytic technology to being able to take carbon dioxide and some other materials, they can be bio-derived materials, and tune it to produce these polymers, these fibers. And there, once you've got the polymer is sort of the base unit, then it's spun to become a fiber, and then the fiber is weaved into a fabric. And yeah, at that point, you've got a CO2 based scarf.
So I'm burning fossil fuels, and I'm massively, my carbon footprint is ridiculous. By actually putting within my process the ViridiCO2 solution, I'm able to become carbon neutral, carbon negative.
Yes, that's the plan. So the technology for a lot of the materials at the moment can reduce the fossil fuel impact by 50%. We're not at 100% yet. That's due to sort of just building on the technologies, and it's a starting point for us. But actually, we're looking into the other 50% being bio-derived. So that would be 100% no more fossil fuels. But anyway, by taking a process which solely produces CO2, and either through just the process itself or just through heating of the process, for example, using the power station on site, we can redirect the CO2 in order to become carbon neutral, or even better, carbon negative.
Wow. So are you doing any real world testing of this right now?
So at the moment, what we're doing is we're imminently spinning, and we have successfully won a grant from Innovate UK. That grant is going to accelerate ViridiCO2's scaling and also industrial implementation. So we are still very early. Over the next 12 months, we are looking to achieve two really big technical and commercial milestones. And that is being able to scale the catalytic platform up to kilogram scale, but also take that catalytic platform and develop it with commercial partners who will essentially get an unfair market access to it. But what it does is it gives one of our commercial partners the ability to tell us what they want from a technical delivery standpoint, and we will do that for them. And then in 12 months, we'll have a scaled solution that is industrially applicable, and then we go from there. And we've given ourselves 12 months to achieve that.
What does Dr. Daniel Stewart want 5 years to look like in terms of ViridiCO2?
I want to be a global player in helping companies reduce their CO2 footprint. I want to be the go-to name for providing CO2 solutions. If someone else isn't going to do it, then I want to do it. I've grown up with the climate issue, and if I can have any impact at all on bringing about change, advances in the way we produce everyday items in order to reduce the carbon footprint associated with it, then I'll be happy.
I'll tell you what, if it works like you say it does, and you get through your scaling up and your testing, it's phenomenal. Don't you get up every morning super excited?
I've got to admit, some of the hours that I'm putting in getting up difficult as it is.
But thanks so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and I'll speak again soon.
We will. All the best. Thank you. I am absolutely blown away by what he's trying to achieve. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. The Planet Driven Brands podcast is the brainchild and copyright of Nick Jones and is broadcast in partnership with theplanetsagency.com. Planet's agency is a partnership of consultants and communications experts. We build planet-driven brands. During the series of shows, we'll be hearing from more experts and we would love for you to be involved. Please do comment or come back to us with questions. We'll be happy to engage. If you wish to be notified when our episodes are broadcast, please subscribe on the website. If you'd like to be part of the show, we'd love to hear from you. We look forward to many more entertaining episodes. Thanks again for listening.